When I opened the garage door and saw the faded blue Ford Focus that had weathered the years, my heart sank. That car was all that remained of the man I had spent 30 years of my life with. With more than 200,000 miles on it, scratches along both sides, and a small dent on the rear bumper, it looked as weary as the memories it carried. My daughter-in-law glanced at it and laughed softly, leaning down to whisper to my son, just loud enough for me to hear, "A lifetime. And all he left behind is this pile of scrap metal." I pretended not to notice, but a few hours later, when I started the car, something strange appeared on the GPS screen. Hidden inside was a message my husband had left me, and what I discovered after that made my whole body tremble. My name is Julie, and I'm 61 years old. Until 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew everything about my late husband, Mark. We had been married for nearly 30 years. He worked as a manager at a small hardware store. His salary wasn't high, but he always took care of our family. We weren't wealthy, but we never complained. Our home was one half of a duplex in a modest neighborhood outside Chicago. Our 2 children, Emily and Ryan, were grown, married, and living on their own. Mark constantly worried about money, clipping coupons, bargaining at the supermarket, fixing everything himself instead of buying new. "We need to save for our old age, Julie," he used to say. But when he died suddenly at 65 from a heart attack while mowing the backyard, our bank account was nearly empty. There were only a few dollars left in savings and that old Focus. The house I thought we owned turned out to be rented. The condo he had described as our retirement home didn't exist. No insurance, no investments, nothing. That was what the lawyer confirmed when he read the will in front of the family. I was told to vacate the house within 60 days. When Ryan hugged me in silence, his face... Wife Melissa couldn't hide her contempt. "Did you even know he had nothing? How were you two planning to live?" Her words cut deep. I truly didn't know. Mark had always told me everything was fine, that I didn't need to worry. After the funeral, after a few neighbors brought casseroles I couldn't bring myself to eat, I was left completely alone. On Friday night, 3 days after the burial, I sat in the kitchen staring at the car keys. I needed to start packing, but I couldn't. How do you box up 30 years of life? How do you choose what to take when you have nowhere to go? Emily had offered her small apartment, but that would only be temporary. Ryan lived in a cramped duplex with his wife and 2 children, and Melissa had already made it clear there was no room for anyone else. I took the keys and went to the garage. I might as well see if the car still ran. I rarely drove. Mark was always the one behind the wheel, but now I had to take care of myself. Sitting in the driver's seat, I could still smell a faint trace of him. The cracked leather steering wheel, the dusty dashboard, and the small cross hanging from the rear-view mirror made my chest tighten. I turned the key. The engine coughed, then came to life. The radio came on automatically, playing an old song we used to dance to. I quickly turned it off. That was when I noticed the GPS mounted on the dashboard. We had never used it. Mark preferred paper maps, saying they were more reliable than those tricky gadgets. Curious, I tapped the screen. A map appeared, and in the corner was an icon labeled Favorite Places. I pressed it and found only one address saved under the name for Julie. I froze. Mark had never mentioned saving an address in the GPS, let alone one named after me. I hesitated, then pressed Start Navigation. My hands trembled slightly as I drove out of the garage. It had been years since I'd driven at night. The streets were quiet, and I followed the GPS directions. 20 minutes later, I realized I was leaving the city, heading toward a sparsely populated area. "Continue for a few more miles," the mechanical voice instructed. I wondered, where was Mark taking me? The road grew darker, trees on both sides forming shadows. I started to feel uneasy. Could he have entered the wrong address? He'd never mentioned this place. Finally, the GPS told me to turn onto a narrow dirt road. I hesitated but obeyed. The car bumped along uneven ground, the headlights cutting through a narrow path in the woods. Then the voice said, "You have arrived." I stopped the car. Darkness surrounded me, no houses, no lights, just open land and a small trail leading deeper inside. I turned off the engine but kept the headlights on. I grabbed my phone, switched on the flashlight, and stepped outside. The night air was cool, filled only with the sound of crickets. The trail looked narrow but clearly used. "Mark, what do you want me to see here?" I whispered into the dark. My heart pounded as I followed the path. After a few minutes, the trees opened up to reveal a small wooden cabin. A faint light glowed from its window. I froze. Mark had never mentioned owning a cabin. Why had he hidden it? On the cabin door was a clear envelope with my name written in his familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter and a key. "My dearest Julie," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. Go inside and see the final gift I've been preparing for years." I stood motionless, reading those words again and again under the beam of my phone. His handwriting pierced my heart. I took a deep breath and continued reading. "I've always feared leaving you with nothing. While alive, I could work and care for you, but if I were gone? The world isn't kind to widows, Julie. That's why I made a plan. From the time you were pregnant with Emily, I started. I opened the front cabin door. It was small, just over 300 square feet, but neat and clean. A tiny living room, a wooden table, 2 chairs, a kitchenette in the corner, and a door leading to a bedroom. On the wall hung our wedding photo, me in a simple white dress, Mark in his only suit, both of us glowing with happiness. Beside it were other photos, Emily as a newborn, Ryan's first steps, a beach vacation, our 25th anniversary. On the table sat a large envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were papers, lots of them. A deed showing the cabin was fully paid off, registered under both our names. Then came land titles, 30 acres of forest surrounding the cabin, also in our names. A bank statement from an account I'd never heard of showed a balance of more than $38,000. There were also insurance policies, investment portfolios, and stock certificates, all neatly organized. I continued reading his letter. "Everything you see here now belongs to you. The cabin, the land, the savings, the investments. If you manage it wisely, you can live comfortably for the rest of your life. Not rich, but independent. I didn't include these in the will because I didn't want anyone to know, not even the kids. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I know how money can change people. This is just between us, even now that I'm gone." I opened the drawer he mentioned. Inside was a business card for a lawyer named Mr. Harris, along with his phone number. Next to it sat a small wooden box. I lifted the lid to find a sheet of paper listing passwords, bank accounts, safe codes, and alarm information. I picked up the letter again and read the final line. "You may be angry that I kept this secret, but every time I worried or acted frugal, it was because I thought of this moment when you would need to stand on your own. One last thing. In the bedroom, there's a small safe hidden behind the painting of our first house. The code is the day we met the rainy afternoon at the bus stop. Inside, you'll find one final gift." My heart raced as I walked into the small bedroom with its simple wooden furniture and double bed. On the wall hung a watercolor painting of the house where we'd lived during our early marriage. I took it down and saw a small safe behind it. I entered the code September 5th, 1979. A soft click sounded, and the safe opened. Inside was a deep blue velvet box. I lifted it slowly. Inside lay a gold necklace with a sapphire pendant, the same stone Mark had always said matched my eyes. I had never owned jewelry so beautiful, not even close. Next to the necklace was a small note. So, you'll always remember that even on your hardest days, you were my most precious treasure. Forever yours, Mark. Tears streamed down my face. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the necklace and letters, crying for the man who had spent his entire life quietly building a future for me without praise, without recognition, without anyone knowing. In that moment, I realized I had never truly known my husband. Behind the frugal, simple man I thought I understood was someone profound, determined, willing to sacrifice his own comfort for a greater purpose. I stayed in the cabin that night, surrounded by memories and the papers that represented a lifetime of quiet devotion. When the first morning light filtered through the window, I understood that Mark's final gift wasn't just money or security, it was a chance to begin again. The next morning, I stepped outside into the cool countryside air. Sunlight stretched across the 30-acre property that was now mine. According to the documents, Mark had bought each piece over 20 years, slowly joining them into one. I walked around, finding a small pond, rows of fruit trees, and a carefully tended garden behind the cabin. I wondered who had been maintaining this place while Mark worked in Chicago. Among the papers, I found a contract with a man named Mr. Johnson, hired to care for the property weekly, already prepaid for the next year. I went back inside, made a cup of coffee, and sat thinking about what to do next. Gradually, I realized I no longer felt hopeless. I had a home, money to live on, and a future. Mark was gone, but I was no longer dependent on pity or judgment. I picked up my phone and called Emily and Ryan, telling them only that I'd found something important Mark had left and wanted them to come see me. Emily sounded worried, Ryan confused, but they both agreed to visit that afternoon. While waiting, I organized all the documents on the table, reading them over and over, trying to grasp the scale of what Mark had done. I finally understood why he'd always been tired, why he'd worked himself to exhaustion, why he'd pinched every penny. It wasn't greed, it was love. Around 4 p.m., I heard cars outside. From the porch, I saw Emily's small Honda and Ryan's Chevrolet with his wife, Melissa, in the passenger seat. "Mom, what is this place? How did you find it?" Emily ran to hug me tightly. "We've been calling you non-stop." Ryan approached, looking around curiously. "Whose cabin is this? Why did you ask us to come here?" Melissa stood behind him, arms crossed, scanning everything critically. "You should be resting at home, not driving around like this," she said coolly. "Come inside," I replied. "There's something I need to show you." They stopped at the doorway, astonished by the cozy, tidy space. I pointed to the table. "Sit down. I have something to tell you." I explained about the GPS, the drive the night before, and everything I had discovered. I showed them the documents and explained Mark's entire financial plan, not deception, but careful love. Emily began to cry when she saw the numbers in the account statements and investment portfolios. Ryan sat silently, eyes fixed on the ownership deed bearing both our names. Melissa turned pale. "I wanted you to see these things so you'd know I'm okay," I said calmly. "Your father took care of everything. Why didn't he tell us?" Ryan finally asked, his voice shaking. Why live like we had nothing when he had all this? I handed him the part of the letter where Mark explained his reasons. Ryan read aloud, his voice breaking at the end. Emily wiped her tears. Dad was always private, never talked about money. I remember him getting upset when we asked for expensive things. I nodded. He wanted you to understand that happiness isn't measured by possessions. Melissa stayed quiet for a moment, then asked, "So all of this, the cabin, the land, the money, it's all yours now?" "Yes," I replied, "but I'll keep living simply, just as your father taught me." I saw a flicker of surprise, maybe calculation, in her eyes. I was used to that look. "Well, that's surprising," she murmured. "We're happy for you. And if you need someone to help manage everything, Ryan knows a lot about investments, right?" Ryan glanced at her, then said softly, "Mom can handle it, Melissa. Besides, Dad already appointed a lawyer to help." We spent the rest of the afternoon walking around the property. I showed them the pond, the fruit trees, the garden. Emily suggested we all come here once a month for lunch. Ryan, ever practical, talked about improving the access road. As the sun set, Emily hugged me tightly. "I'll miss you in the city, but I'm glad you have this place. It feels like Dad's still taking care of you, even from afar." Ryan hugged me too, whispering, "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have helped you more instead of letting Melissa." He stopped, but I understood. "It's all right," I said gently. "None of you knew. No one did." Before getting into the car, Melissa came closer to me and forced a faint smile. "Julie, I want to apologize for what I said. When we read the will that Mark didn't even leave enough money for a proper funeral, I was wrong." I looked at her and saw not only regret but also shame for having underestimated my husband. "No need to apologize," I said gently. "You were right, Mark didn't leave money for a funeral. He left me a life." She fell silent, nodded, and turned away. I stood on the porch, watching the two cars disappear down the dirt road. The weight I had carried for days, fear of the future, humiliation of being poor, the feeling of dependence slowly lifted. I went back to the table and reopened Mark's letter. Under the warm lamplight, I noticed a small line written at the bottom of the page. P.S. I always believed the Focus was the perfect car for you, economical, strong, and simple, just like us. Take care of it the way you once took care of me." I laughed through tears, realizing that even that old car was part of his plan, not just transportation, but a symbol of his love and protection. That night, I slept peacefully in the cabin, under the roof Mark had built, surrounded by the safety he had left behind. The pain of losing him was still there, but now it was mixed with a deep gratitude for the man who had loved me enough to plan for a time when he would no longer be here. A week later, I made my decision the cabin would be my new home, not just because it made financial sense, but because every corner carried Mark's touch, his care, his vision, and his love. On Monday, I called Mr. Harris, the lawyer Mark had mentioned in his letter. He didn't sound surprised to hear from me. "You sound exactly as he described," he said kindly. "Mr. Mark prepared everything very carefully." The following days were filled with paperwork, bank meetings, and property transfers, all the things Mark used to handle. Mr. Harris was patient, explaining every detail, guiding me step by step to finalize ownership. "Your husband was an extraordinary planner," he said. "In more than 30 years of practice, I've never seen anyone prepare so thoroughly." I discovered that Mark had started all of this right after Emily was born. He had opened a secret account, depositing a small portion of his salary every month for 3 decades. He bought the first piece of land when this area was still a quiet rural stretch outside Chicago, then slowly expanded. The cabin had been built in phases, the frame first, then the interior, and finally all the small details that made it feel like home. Everything was paid in cash, every receipt meticulously stored. As I packed to move from the rental house to the cabin, I began adding touches of my own. Mark had built with simplicity and practicality, but I wanted a bit of color. I bought new curtains, planted some potted flowers, brought my favorite books, and hung more family photos. Mr. Johnson, the caretaker, became an unexpected comfort. He was about 70, a quiet man who knew every inch of the property. "Your husband came here twice a month," he told me, while showing how to operate the garden's irrigation system. Whenever he said he had a weekend work trip, he was actually here. He planted every tree himself. Said he wanted you to have fresh fruit all year round. I looked at the tidy garden, apple, orange, and peach trees at different stages of growth, and imagined Mark digging each hole, thinking of me with every shovel of soil. So many weekends he had spent here, quietly building this refuge while I thought he was working overtime at the store. "Mr. Johnson continued, as if sensing I wanted to hear more. "He talked about you a lot, said you deserved more than he could ever show you. Said one day you'd understand why he lived so simply." In the following days, I kept discovering hidden details across the land. Behind the cabin was a small shed filled with garden tools, all neatly arranged. On the shelves were rows of glass jars holding seeds, each labeled in Mark's familiar handwriting. I also found a notebook filled with his meticulous notes on plants, their blooming seasons, care routines, and common issues. By the end of the month, when it was time to leave the old rental house for good, Emily and Ryan came to help with the final move. I brought only what was necessary: clothes, a few keepsakes, photo albums, and small sentimental things. Melissa didn't come. Ryan said she was busy preparing for a charity event, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. Ever since discovering the cabin and the money, Melissa had been avoiding me. "She feels ashamed, Mom," Emily said as we arranged books on the shelf inside the cabin. "Ryan told me she feels awful for judging you, for the things she said." I answered calmly, "I just hope she truly regrets it. Not because of what she said about me, but because she misjudged your father, the man she called a failure, while he was quietly building all this." Emily placed a hand on my shoulder. "Dad never cared what people thought. He only cared about results, never about showing off. I think he's smiling now, knowing he surprised us all." I nodded, my heart swelling with emotion. Mark, the man who succeeded quietly, had never needed praise or recognition. Perhaps now he was finally at peace, knowing everything turned out just as he'd planned. That night, after the kids left, I sat alone on the porch with a cup of tea, gazing at the star-filled sky, a view so different from the gray city skyline I'd seen for years through the apartment window. The next morning, I began a new routine. I woke up early, as I always had, but instead of brewing coffee for Mark before he left for work, I now sat on the porch, sipping it alone while watching the sunrise through the trees around the cabin. Then I went out to the garden to work with Mr. Johnson. "You learn fast," he said as I carefully pulled weeds without damaging the lettuce. "Mr. Mark always said you had a green thumb, too bad there wasn't enough space in the city." It was true. I had always loved plants, but our tiny backyard in the city barely had room for a few pots. Clearly, Mark had noticed that too, remembering even my smallest wishes. A month later, I received an unexpected phone call from Melissa. Her voice trembled, so unlike her usual confidence. "Julie, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Melissa. How have you been?" There was a brief silence before she said, "I'd like to come see you, just me." There's something I need to say in person." I was surprised but agreed. The next morning, at exactly 10 a.m., I heard a car stop outside. Through the kitchen window, I saw Melissa step out of a shiny Audi, looking slightly out of place in her tailored suit amid the rustic surroundings. I opened the door before she could knock. "Good morning, Melissa. Come on in." She accepted the coffee I offered and sat at the table. "This place is even more beautiful than I imagined," she said, glancing around. "Ryan said it was just a cabin. I thought it'd be much simpler." "Mark never did anything halfway," I replied. "Even when living simply, he valued comfort." She turned the cup in her hands, visibly uneasy. After a pause, she spoke softly. "I came to apologize. Not just for the awful things I said after Mark's funeral, but for how I treated you all these years." I stayed quiet, letting her continue. "I always thought you and Mark were failures," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I used to wonder how someone could work 30 years and have nothing to show for it. No house, no luxury car, no fancy vacations. I judged you because you didn't have those things." She looked out the window toward the garden, her voice dropping lower. "Now I realize you two built something far greater. While I wasted money keeping up appearances, Mark quietly built real value." Her eyes filled with tears. "Ryan and I are drowning in debt, mortgage, car payments, credit cards, all just to look successful. The cruel irony is that the man I once called a failure was the one who got it right." I sat quietly, feeling a mixture of sadness and compassion. "Melissa," I said softly, "we don't need to live for other people's approval. Mark understood that long ago. He didn't care what anyone thought. He only cared that we were safe." "How could you live like that? Not wanting more, not caring about what others think?" she asked. I smiled. "I trusted Mark," I said. "And I learned to find joy in small things, a simple dinner, a walk together, watching our kids grow up. We didn't need much to be happy. We talked for hours, more openly than ever before. When Melissa was about to leave, she looked at me with softer eyes. "Julie," she said at the door, "would you teach me a little about gardening? I want to learn to grow things, to save, to live simpler." I smiled. "Of course, Melissa. You're welcome anytime. I'm still learning too. We can learn together." In the weeks that followed, Melissa started visiting regularly, first alone, then with Ryan and their 2 kids. The cabin Mark built for me slowly became the family's gathering place. Emily came on weekends with her husband and son. The kids loved exploring the land, playing by the pond, and picking fruit straight from the trees. One day, Ryan found me while I was watering the garden. "Mom, can I ask you something? Did you really never suspect anything? Nothing seemed odd?" I set the watering can down and thought for a moment. There were times I wondered money missing before payday, weekends when he came home exhausted, sometimes with dirt still on his hands even though he worked at the store. But I trusted Mark. If he hid something, it had to be for a good reason. Ryan looked at me with admiration and emotion. "That's incredible faith, Mom. I'm not sure I could do that." "Your father gave me every reason to trust him for 30 years, I said. "He never made me doubt his love or integrity. And in the end, he proved that faith was well placed." After Ryan left, I looked around the cabin and thought about how much had changed. The pain of losing Mark was still there, but it was now accompanied by deep gratitude not just for what he left behind, but for his foresight, his discipline, and his enduring love. The cabin, once just a refuge, had truly become a home, a place where the family gathered, where I grew flowers, and where I still felt him close. Sometimes I still cried, not out of sadness alone, but from emotion a mix of loss, love, and gratitude for the man who had walked beside me and continued to protect me even after he was gone. 6 months had passed since I discovered the cabin. Autumn arrived, painting the land in shades of gold and red. The apple trees were heavy with fruit, and each morning Mr. Johnson and I picked them together. One afternoon, while cleaning out the desk drawer in the small office corner, I found an old brown notebook hidden under a pile of papers. I opened it and instantly recognized Mark's handwriting, neat, steady, familiar. It was a kind of journal, not about emotions but detailed records of his visits here over the past 24 years. March 17th, 2001. Bought 2 more acres next to the old plot. The seller thinks I'm crazy for choosing a place this remote, but the price is too good. Someday, when Julie finds out, she'll have a peaceful place to live. My eyes blurred as I turned the page. He had recorded everything, buying more land, planting trees, building the cabin, repairing it year by year. September 5th, 2008. Finished the cabin roof. Took longer than I planned, but I want it solid. I want Julie to have a place that won't need fixing after I'm gone. I froze. Mark hadn't just saved money for me, he had built a future with his own hands, brick by brick, tree by tree. July 18th, 2015. Planted peach trees today. Julie loves fresh peaches, but we can't grow them in the city. Maybe in 8 or 10 years they'll bear fruit. I hope I'll still be alive to see them. If not, I hope she'll enjoy the late gift. I sat still, the notebook open on my lap, imagining him calculating the growth years of each tree, planning for a future he might never see. Each line revealed not just practicality but profound faith in life itself. I kept reading, each page bringing to life the man I loved, the man I perhaps never fully understood. November 2nd, 2019. The doctor found something in my test results. I haven't told Julie yet. I don't want her to worry. But if it's what I think, I need to speed up everything. The cabin was almost complete by then, with only small details left to finish. He wrote that the money had been safely invested and that if the worst happened, I would be protected. My heart froze. 2019, 5 years before he passed away. Mark had known about his heart condition. How long had he carried that burden alone? I quickly turned the pages, searching for more. The following entries grew denser, more urgent. January 2020, the doctor confirmed it's serious heart disease. They recommended surgery, but the success rate is low. I decided not to tell Julie. What good would that do? It would only make her worry more. I'm taking medication, following a diet. Meanwhile, I'm working here as much as I can. I want everything to be perfect for her. I trembled as I read those words. Mark had lived the last 4 years of his life knowing his time was running out. Those light lunches he insisted we share, those daily walks he called for our health, they were all part of the treatment plan he hid from me. The final pages contained only a few short lines, as though the word took all his strength. June 2023. Today I installed the GPS. It seems small, but it matters. I want Julie to find this place when I'm gone. I thought about giving her the address, but she deserves the journey, the discovery. She deserves to feel what I once did, the anticipation, the sense that something special waits at the end of the road. The last line was written just weeks before he died. March 2024. I no longer have the strength to work as before. I've asked Mr. Johnson to take on more tasks. He didn't ask questions, but I think he understands. I know my time is short, yet I'm at peace. I've done all I can to ensure Julie's safety. Everything I built, planted, and saved was for her. I only hope she knows I kept the secret not from mistrust, but from love. I wanted to spare her the fear of watching me fade. I wanted her to remember me strong. I closed the notebook, tears streaming down my face. Mark had faced death with the same calm precision he brought to life. He planned, prepared, and arranged everything, not just the finances, but the very path that would lead me to his final gift. And he chose to bear the pain alone, hiding his illness so I would never have to watch him weaken day by day. I didn't know whether to feel grateful for his protection or devastated that I'd been denied the chance to say goodbye, to care for him, to say everything left unsaid. That night I called our children. I needed to share what I'd found. I needed them to know the truth about the father they thought they already understood. Emily cried over the phone, while Ryan stayed silent for a long moment before saying hoarsely, "He was stronger than any of us ever imagined." The next day I invited Mr. Johnson to the cabin. When he sat down at the table, I placed the journal before him. "You knew about Mark's illness, didn't you?" He nodded slowly. He made me promise not to tell anyone. Said, "It was better that way." "How long have you known?" "Almost 5 years," he replied. "That last year, he could barely work. He'd just come here, sit on the bench by the lake, and look around at everything he'd made. Sometimes he'd ask me to fix a nail or a board, but most of the time he just sat quietly like he was saying goodbye." I pictured Mark sitting by the lake, his eyes tracing the place he had built for me, knowing his time was running out, yet still determined to finish what he'd started. "Why do you think he never told me about his illness, about the cabin?" I asked. "Mr." Johnson thought for a while, his rough hands resting on the table. "Your husband was a private man. He didn't talk much, but every time he mentioned you, his eyes lit up. He once said the greatest joy of his life was seeing you happy. He didn't want you burdened with worry or to know what he sacrificed to give you this place." I fell silent. How many weekends had Mark spent working here instead of resting? How many extra hours at the store? How many times had he refused a purchase just to save a few dollars? All to build the home where I now sat our home. That afternoon, I walked to the bench by the lake, the one Mr. Johnson had mentioned. The sunset reflected off the water in soft gold hues. The trees surrounding the lake, many planted by Mark himself, swayed gently in the wind. "I could have faced it with you," I whispered, as if he were still listening. "But I understand why you carried it alone. You're still you, the man who always protected me, always put me first." In the days that followed, I found new purpose. I began writing my own story in a notebook like Mark's, not just for myself, but for our children, for anyone who might come after. I wanted them to know who Mark truly was, not just the frugal, modest man they saw, but the visionary who quietly built a legacy of love. As autumn gave way to winter, I felt a peace I'd dared. It's never known before. The pain remained, but it blended with deep reverence for the man who had loved me so completely, so quietly, to his last breath. As the first anniversary of his death approached, grief returned, but I kept myself busy. I turned the small work corner into a memorial room, hung photos of us, placed his favorite things, and kept the journal inside a wooden box Ryan had made to preserve it. That winter was colder than usual. There were nights of suffocating loneliness, but I had found ways to endure tending the garden, visiting neighbors, and welcoming regular visits from the children and grandchildren. A week before the anniversary, I received a call from Mr. Harris, the lawyer. "Mrs. Julie, I have an envelope your husband left with me. He instructed that it be delivered 1 year after his passing." My heart raced. "What's inside?" "I don't know," he said. "He only specified the date of delivery. I can bring it to you tomorrow." I agreed, full of curiosity. The next morning, Mr. Harris arrived. As he stepped onto the porch, he looked around and said, "Your husband spoke of this place often. Every time he came, he described it like a treasure. He built all of it himself?" "Yes, he did," I said. He nodded softly. "In my entire career, I've rarely met anyone with such determination and foresight." After a few polite exchanges, he handed me a medium-sized envelope, sealed carefully, my name written in Mark's familiar handwriting. He insisted it be delivered in person, not mailed. He said it was too important. After he left, I opened it. Inside was a smaller envelope, a black USB drive, and a letter. "My dearest Julie, if you're reading this, it's been 1 year since I left. I hope that despite the sadness, you've found something new this past year. Maybe peace, maybe joy. I hope the cabin has become your home, the trees are bearing fruit, and that you feel safe in the place I built with every flawed nail, every brick, every thought of you. There's one last thing I want to share, something that might help you understand why I lived the way I did, why I made the choices I did." On the USB, there's a recording of a conversation between my father and me just a week before he passed away. I was 22 then, and we'd been engaged for 2 months. Do you remember? We were so young, so full of dreams. My father, a simple factory worker, called me in for one final talk. He knew his time was short because of the cancer. I recorded it without him knowing. Back then, I just wanted to keep his voice, his advice. I didn't realize that conversation would shape the rest of my life. When you're ready, listen to it. Maybe you'll understand more about the man you married. In the smaller envelope is another gift, something I bought years ago and kept until the right moment. It's just a small symbol. "With all my love, Mark." With trembling hands, I plugged the USB into the old laptop I still used to manage the property. There was only one audio file, recorded 43 years ago. When I hit play, Mark's young, confident voice filled the kitchen. "Dad, can I record this conversation so I can remember it later?" An older voice, raspy but warm, replied, "You don't need to, son. What I'm about to tell you is simple. You won't forget it. I still want to keep your voice." A sigh. "All right then. What do you want to ask?" "You called me here to talk, said it was important, before you. Before I go, right? Go ahead. No need to hide it." There was a pause. Then the father's voice softened. "You're about to marry a good woman. I'm happy for you, even though I won't be there to see it. Remember this one piece of advice. It's what my father told me, and his father before him. The worth of a man isn't in what he owns, but in what he protects. Do you understand? It's not about how big the house is, but whether it keeps your family dry when the storm comes. It's not about the car's luxury, but whether it gets them safely where they need to go." Tears rolled down my cheeks as I listened to the father I'd never met share the philosophy that had guided Mark's life. "Your mother never had expensive jewelry or fine dresses, but our table was never empty. We never had to choose between medicine and rent, never had to beg for help. That's dignity, son. That's a man's duty, not luxury, but security, not appearance, but true worth." His voice grew weaker, followed by the sound of a cup being set down. "These days, too many young people buy cars they can't afford, houses that drown them in debt, just to impress people who don't care. Don't be like them. Live below your means. Save. Build something lasting, even if it takes decades. Be the rock your family can lean on when the storm comes. And the storm always comes, son, always." The recording went on for several more minutes, simple, heartfelt advice about money, work, and family. When it ended, I sat still, overwhelmed with emotion. I opened the smaller envelope. Inside was an old key tied with a plain string, along with a note. "This is the key to the house where I was born. That house was torn down decades ago to make way for a supermarket, but I kept the key as a reminder of what my father taught me. Now it's yours, not because it can open any door, but because it represents what I always tried to be for you, a safe shelter, a steady harbor in the storm. You have always been my greatest treasure, Julie. Every extra hour, every sacrifice, every small joy I set aside was worth it, just to know you would be safe, even when I could no longer be there." I slipped the string around my neck, feeling the cool metal rest against my chest. It was heavy, solid, just like the love Mark had given me silently for all those years. That night, I sat on the porch and wrote in the journal I had kept since finding his. 1 year after his passing, I finally understood the man I had spent my life with. Mark lived by a principle rare in today's world, a world obsessed with appearances. He valued safety over comfort, substance over style, protection over pride. While the world measured success by what could be shown, he measured it by what could be kept, especially me. His legacy wasn't just in the trees he planted or the money he saved, but in a steadfast love expressed through action, not applause. Now I carry that lesson with me. While the world chases what's new, bright, and flashy, I find peace knowing I was loved in the truest way, not with grand words, but with a lifetime of quiet choices that always placed me at the center. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the land. The peach trees Mark had planted nearly 10 years earlier bloomed in full, promising a rich harvest. I planted colorful flowers around the cabin, something he, ever the practical man, had never prioritized, but I knew he would have smiled to see them. One bright April morning, an unexpected visitor arrived. A sleek car stopped at the end of the drive. A well-dressed man in his 50s stepped out, curious yet polite. "Can I help you?" I asked from the porch. He removed his sunglasses and smiled. "Mrs. Julie, my name is Richard Myers. I don't know if Mark ever mentioned me." I frowned, trying to remember. "I don't think so." He nodded. "I'm a friend, a colleague of Mark's. Not from the hardware store, actually. I came to talk about that." I invited him in. We sat on the porch with coffee. Richard hesitated, clearly weighing his words. "Mrs. Julie, I work for a real estate investment firm. I only recently learned about Mark's passing. I think you may not know everything about the work he did with us." I froze. "Work?" Mark was a store manager in Chicago for nearly 30 years. Richard nodded slightly. "Yes, that's true, but that was only part of his professional life. Mark was also an investment consultant for us. He had an extraordinary eye for spotting undervalued properties with long-term potential." I was stunned. "He never mentioned anything about that," Richard explained in a gentle tone. "About 25 years ago, Mark came to our office to ask about a piece of land, this very area. During the conversation, he showed a deep understanding of land value, development trends, and long-term appreciation. My father, who founded the company, invited him to collaborate part-time. At first, Mark refused, but when my father insisted on paying him for his insights, he agreed. That was how our partnership began," I whispered, almost in disbelief. "Are you saying Mark had a secret second job all these years?" "Not exactly an official job," Richard replied. "He helped us assess rural land, places like this area. Sometimes he worked remotely, sometimes he went out for on-site evaluations. Perhaps those business trips you thought were for meetings at the hardware store were actually land visits. He had a natural talent for long-term investment, Richard continued. He chose projects that took a decade or more to yield profit, but when they succeeded, the returns were substantial. He was well compensated partly in cash, but mostly in shares. Over time, those shares accumulated into something very significant, I murmured. Very significant. How much are we talking about? Richard opened his briefcase and took out a folder. That's why I'm here. Mark owned shares in 17 different projects, shopping centers, residential developments, office buildings. All long-term ventures that reflected his remarkable vision. He pushed the folder toward me. These assets now belong to you, according to inheritance law. We tried to contact you before, but only recently found the cabin address. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were contracts, financial statements, and profit reports numbers that made Mark's savings look small by comparison. The total value of his holdings is currently around $8,700,000, Richard said softly. I sat speechless. He never told you, did he? Richard asked quietly. I nodded, tears welling up. He only left me this cabin and a modest amount of savings. I thought that was everything. Richard smiled sadly. Not surprising. He lived very simply. At the company, everyone knew Mark lived far below his means, but all respected him deeply for it. He once told us, "The worth of a man isn't in what he owns, but in what he protects." I repeated the words through tears. That's right. That's what he learned from his father. Richard nodded. I heard him say that many times. It was almost like his creed. As I looked at the numbers before me, I realized that all those years we lived frugally, Mark had been quietly building an empire not for show, but to secure my future. He had turned down several raises, choosing shares over cash, believing that money could disappear, but real assets would grow over time. I asked softly, why didn't he ever tell me? Richard was silent for a moment before answering. I'm not sure, but my father once said Mark was afraid, maybe afraid something bad would happen. My heart sank. You knew about his heart condition? Richard nodded. Yes. He told us about 4 years ago, when he started arranging things more carefully, transferring ownerships, ensuring all documents were in order. He prepared everything down to the last detail. Richard then pulled out another envelope. And this is the last thing Mark asked me to give you. I took it, immediately recognizing his familiar handwriting. I opened it and read, My dearest Julie, if you're reading this letter, it means you've learned about my other work. I hope you understand why I kept it secret all these years. At first, it was just a way to earn extra so I could build something for us. But when success came, fear followed. I feared that money might change us, as I'd seen in so many families. Friends torn apart by jealousy, couples drifting apart under expectations, children spoiled by excess. I feared that if I died early, you might be manipulated or taken advantage of by greedy people. So, I created layers of protection. The first was the cabin and enough savings to keep you comfortable. The second is this, my final gift. Maybe the way I did it seems calculated, and maybe it was. I'm sorry if it ever hurt you. But every decision I made was for your safety. Now you have all the choices I once wished for you. You can continue to live simply in the cabin, using the dividends for your comfort. You can help our children and grandchildren, support causes you believe in. You can travel, explore, do the things we once dreamed of but never had time to do. I only ask one thing, don't let money change who you are. The gentle, kind, and sincere woman I married is the greatest treasure of my life. You have always been my most precious asset. Forever yours, Mark. By the time I finished reading, Tears were streaming down my face. Richard quietly handed me a handkerchief, waiting for me to regain composure. "Your husband was an extraordinary man," he said softly. "Everyone at the firm admired him. I've never met anyone who combined financial brilliance with such integrity." I nodded silently. The Mark I had known for 30 years, the humble, hard-working, frugal husband, was entirely real. But there was another Mark, too. The man who had quietly become a master strategist, a patient builder of an invisible empire. In the days that followed, as I worked with Richard to understand the scope of what Mark had built, I swung between awe, confusion, and at times, anger at the enormity of the secret he'd kept. How could we have lived together all those years, and I never knew such a crucial part of his life? Yet as I organized the papers, studying every investment, every financial decision he had made over decades, I slowly saw the logic, the perfect alignment between the husband I knew and the investor he had hidden. Every investment reflected his core values, choosing projects that benefited communities, avoiding harm to small businesses, prioritizing sustainability long before it became a buzzword. The man who fixed everything at home instead of buying new was the same man who championed green standards in his developments. The man who counted every dollar at the grocery store was also quietly donating through charitable funds tied to his work. 3 weeks after meeting Richard, I invited the entire family to the cabin. The sky was clear that day, perfect for an outdoor lunch. Emily and Ryan helped set the table under the trees. The kids ran around with the small dog we had recently adopted, and Melissa prepared salad with vegetables from the garden. "Are you all right, Mom?" she asked when she noticed my quietness. "I'm perfectly fine." I smiled, thinking about the strange turns life had taken. When everyone sat down, I raised my glass. "To Mark," I said. The family followed, their eyes filled with tenderness and longing. I took a deep breath. "Today I have something important to share about your father, about our life." I told them about Richard, about Mark's secret work, about the fortune he had quietly built over the years. I spoke of the investments, the shares, now part of their inheritance. Ryan dropped his fork, Emily covered her mouth, and Melissa went pale. "I can't believe it," Ryan whispered. "All these years, we lived like an ordinary middle-class family." "That's exactly what your father wanted," I said. "He believed that flaunted wealth could change us, make us forget what truly matters." I handed them Mark's final letter. When they finished reading, their eyes glistened. "He was a genius," Emily said, her voice trembling. "A quiet genius," I replied. "But more than that, he understood the true meaning of love. To Mark, love meant protection, ensuring his family's safety and future." I looked at my children, my daughter-in-law and my grandchildren, then placed a folder on the table. "Your father built all this to secure our family's future. Now I'll continue his path. I'm establishing a family foundation. Each of you will have a portion to pursue your dreams, buying a home, studying further, starting a business, or following your passion. But most of the assets will remain in a trust, professionally managed to ensure security for generations," Ryan said emotionally. "Mom, that's incredibly generous." I smiled. "It's not generosity, it's continuity. I'm simply walking the path your father began." I turned to Melissa, who had been silent. "I know you and Ryan have been struggling financially. Those debts will be cleared, but under one condition. You both must take part in a financial education program. Your father taught me to live below our means, to build a foundation instead of chasing appearances. I want you to understand that too." Melissa nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm truly grateful. I misjudged everything. I thought we were more successful, better off. But now I see. Success isn't about having more. I smiled gently. No, it's about appreciating what you have and using it to do what's right. Lunch went on with laughter and tears intertwined. The conversation drifted toward memories of Mark and plans for the future. Watching them, I felt an immense sense of peace, as though balance had finally returned. That evening, after everyone left, I walked to the lake, the same place where Mark had spent so many hours in his final years. I sat on the wooden bench by the water, took the old key from around my neck, and held it in my palm. "You did it, Mark," I whispered. "Everything you planned, everything you built in silence, it all worked. Our family is safe. Your legacy will live on forever." I sat there until the sun went down, its light reflecting on the still surface of the lake. I thought about my journey from a widow who believed she had lost everything, left with only an old car, to the keeper of an enormous legacy built through steadfastness and enduring love. I remembered the two sides of Mark's life: the humble store manager who was also a brilliant investment advisor, the man who bargained over a few dollars at the market yet managed millions in investments, the man who hid great secrets but never once hid his love for me. The following week, I donated a significant portion to a scholarship fund, supporting young entrepreneurs, those who, like Mark once did, had dreams and vision but lacked the means to realize them. I also established a nature preservation fund to protect the land around the cabin, ensuring it would never be destroyed by commercial development. The cabin remained my home. Though I could have bought a luxurious mansion, I never wanted to leave. The wooden house Mark built with his own hands meant more to me than any grand estate ever could. Instead of spending on myself, I used the remaining wealth to help the community, building schools, paving roads, and opening a small clinic for local residents. 2 years after his passing, I received a letter from a woman named Margaret, the wife of one of Mark's former colleagues. "Your husband saved my family," she wrote. "When my husband was diagnosed with cancer, we had no insurance, no savings. It was Mark who paid for the hospital bills, the medicine, and even our mortgage for months. He called it an open-ended loan, but he never took a cent back, even after my husband recovered. He said raising good children was the best kind of investment." More letters followed from former co-workers, neighbors, and people he had quietly helped. I realized that Mark's double life was not only about finances but about compassion. He had always helped others in silence, never seeking recognition. 3 years after he passed, I organized a small memorial on the property. Family, friends, and those he had once helped gathered to plant a large oak tree in the center of the garden, a symbol of the strength and endurance of the love he left behind. As I shoveled the first handfuls of soil, I understood the final lesson he had taught me. True wealth is not in what we own, but in the good we bring to others. The old blue Ford still sits in the garage. I sometimes drive it, remembering that fateful night when the GPS led me to the first gift Mark had left for me. I recall my daughter-in-law's words after the funeral that Mark hadn't left enough money for a proper service. She had been wrong, and so had all of us. That humble man left behind more than anyone could have imagined, not just financial wealth, but lessons in integrity, kindness, and eternal love. Mark never boasted in life. Instead, he chose to build a legacy that would nourish generations to come. He never sought fame. He simply wanted safety and opportunity for those he loved. The final gift he left me was not the cabin, nor the millions of dollars. It was the lesson he lived by every day. That true love isn't found in grand gestures or fancy words, but in steadfast devotion. quiet sacrifice, and unconditional kindness. Now, whenever I look out at the garden he planted, I don't just see trees and flowers, I see a philosophy of life. That love is not what we say, but what we silently do for one another every single day. Perhaps all of us will someday face loss, but if we can love with the sincerity and perseverance that Mark did, then even when our loved ones are gone, that love remains guiding us forward, quietly and faithfully. And what about you? What do you believe is the truest way to show love and responsibility within a family? Share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear from you. And if you still believe there are stories that restore faith in kindness and humanity, stay with me. Because here, we keep alive the simplest yet deepest lessons about love and life.